It began with one question. If Africa was a bar, what would your country be doing or drinking? I started off with a guess about South Africa, which wasn't exactly according to the rules because I'm not South African, but alluding to that continual attempts to overcome that racist past and create a rainbow nation. I said, if Africa was a bar, South Africa would be drinking all types of alcohol and trying to get them to get along in its stomach. And then I waited, and then I had that funny feeling where I wonder if I've crossed the line. So I wrote another tweet about my own country, Botswana. I tweeted, if Africa was a bar, Botswana would be drinking traditional beer in the club and champagne at home. And then I waited again, and then I read through the tweets to remind myself that I'm so funny, and even if nobody else gets it, doesn't matter. But luckily, I didn't have to do that for very long. People very soon were participating. By the end of that week in July, the hashtag If Africa Was a Bar would have garnered around 60,000 tweets and lit up the continent and made it all over the world to publications everywhere. People were using the hashtag to do many different things, to make fun of vast stereotypes, to criticize government spending, to make light of geopolitical tensions, to remind us that there's some countries we forgot exist in Africa. People were using the hashtag to remind us that there's some other African countries that don't realize they're African countries. And then we were also doing it to note the successes of countries that had made a huge turnaround. But most importantly, people were using the hashtag to connect. They were connecting over their Africanness. So for 1 week in July, Twitter was actually a real African bar. And I was like so pumped. I was excited, firstly because I got on CNN and BBC and all that stuff, but also because I realized that Pan-Africanism could work, that we had before us, between us, at our fingertips, a platform that only needed a small spark to light in us a hunger for each other. My name is Siyanda Muhutsiwa. I'm 22 years old, and I am Pan-Africanist by birth. I say I'm Pan-Africanist by birth because my parents are from two different African countries. My father's from a country called Botswana, which is quite large, around the size of Germany, has been a stable democracy for the past 50 years, and has some very successful socialist policies. My mother's country is Swaziland, which is quite small, as you can see. It's around the size of Switzerland, and it is Africa's last complete monarchy. So it's ruled by a king and a royal family in line with our tradition for a very long time. On paper, these countries seem very different. But when I was a kid, I didn't really realize why it mattered that my parents were from two different places. They still yelled at me about the exact same stuff, and they still do, actually. But it would go on to have a very peculiar effect on me. You see, I was born in one country and raised in the other. When we moved to Botswana, I was a toddler who spoke fluent isiSwati and nothing else. So I was being introduced to my new culture, my new home, my new cultural identity as a complete outsider who couldn't understand anything that was being said to me by the society and the country whose traditions I was meant to move forward. But very soon, I would drop Siswati, and I would begin to learn English and Setswana. But when I returned to Swaziland, I would be constantly confronted by this realization that I was not so Swazi anymore. Add to that my entry into Africa's famous private school system, whose entire thing is about beating the Africanness out of you, and I had a very peculiar adolescence. But I think that my interest in the ideas of identity was born here. in the strange intersection of kind of belonging to two places at once, but not belonging to either one very well, and kind of belonging to this vast space in between and outside simultaneously, I developed an interest in the idea of a shared African identity. Since then, I have continued to have a lot of interest in ideas of culture, language, tradition, geography, and what all those things mean. Most importantly, I've kept within me an interest in the idea of African philosophies. So when I was old enough to read what I wanted to, I started with the works of Black intellectuals like Steve Biko and Frantz Fanon. I read the speeches of iconic African presidents like Burkina Faso's Thomas Sankara and Congo's Patrice Lumumba. I read every single piece of African fiction that I could get my hands on, which is actually not as easy as you would think, even in Africa. I continued to have a huge hunger for African history and world history and everything I could learn. So when Twitter came, I hopped on with the enthusiasm of a teenage girl whose friends were so tired about hearing about this random shit. So the year was 2011, and I don't know how, but somehow BlackBerry had this deal in African countries that if you bought the device for roughly $150, you could get like unlimited internet on some really, really good rates. I think I paid like $15 a month for unlimited access to Twitter and Facebook and all this stuff. And it was quite remarkable. But the thing is, of course, it is Africa, so not everybody has this luxury. So this meant that if you were a girl in Botswana and you really wanted to have fun on Twitter, 1, you had to tweet in English. 2, you had to follow more than just the 3 other people you knew who were on Twitter. You had to follow Ghanaians, Nigerians, Zimbabweans, South Africans. And suddenly your whole world opened up. And my whole world did open up. I followed vibrant Africans who were traveling around the continent, posting pictures of themselves under hashtag MyAfrica. And at that time, when you were on Twitter, if you were to Google the word Africa or like Twitter search Africa, you would think the whole continent was just pictures of animals and white guys drinking cocktails at the beach. But Africans were using this hashtag to post pictures of themselves traveling around the continent, taking ownership of their own tourism sector. It was Africans taking selfies on the beaches of Nigeria. It was Africans in cocktail bars in Nairobi. And these are the same Africans that I began to meet in my own travels. We would meet and we would talk about writers like Chinua Achebe, we would talk about Ngugi wa Thiong'o, but almost invariably, almost every time, we would end up talking about Twitter. And that's when I realized what this was. We were standing in the middle of something amazing, something almost revolutionary. Because for the first time ever, young Africans could connect with each other, talk about the future of our continent in real time, without the restriction of finances, borders, and watchful governments. The little-known truth is, Africans know a lot less about each other than some Europeans do about Africa as a whole. This is by accident, but sometimes by design. Many oppressive government systems thrive on their citizens' ignorance about neighboring African countries. In South Africa during apartheid, the Black South Africans were constantly bombarded by this message that any country that was ruled by Black people was destined for failure. And this was done, of course, to convince them that they were much better off under crushing white rule than they were living in another African country. Add to that the strange education system that we have in Africa, which has been carried over from colonial times. And at the age of 15, I could name all the causes of the various wars that had taken place in Europe in the past 200 years, but I couldn't name the president of my neighboring country. And to me, this doesn't make any sense, because whether we like it or not, the fates of African people are deeply intertwined. When turmoil hits, when disaster hits, we share the consequences. When Burundians flee political turmoil, guess where they go? They go to us. What was once a Burundian problem becomes an African problem. In my mind, there are no Burundian problems or South African problems or Kenyan problems, because we eventually share the turmoil. It is all just African problems. So my question is If we eventually share the turmoil, why aren't we doing a better job of sharing the successes? And how can we do that? Well, one, we could focus on increasing intra-African trade from 13% to something that makes more sense. Two, we could make it easier for Africans to travel around other African countries without criminalizing that movement. We could also get our leaders to fulfill the regional agreements they've already signed. But I think my idea worth sharing today is that the best way for us to share our successes is to foster something I like to call social Pan-Africanism. Now, political Pan-Africanism already exists, but it's usually the unity of African leaders themselves, and who does that benefit mainly? It mainly benefits themselves. What I'm talking about is social Pan-Africanism, the Pan-Africanism of the ordinary African. Because of the internet, we now have access to online networks that mean that Africans can now connect in a way that they never could before. We now have something that young Africans used to have to violently take, a voice. We now have a platform. Before, if you wanted to hear from the youth in Africa, you waited for the 65-year-old Minister of Youth to wake up in the morning, take his heartburn medication, and then tell you what plans he had for your generation in 20 years. Before now, if you wanted to be heard by a possibly tyrannical government, you were pushed to protest, suffer the consequences, and have your fingers crossed that some Western paper somewhere might make someone care. For the first time ever, Africans are in the position to back each other up. We don't have to worry about money. We don't have to worry about distance. We can support each other in ways that we never could before. And it's as simple as a hashtag. The South African students are being supported by a hashtag called Fees Must Fall, where they are protesting ridiculously high tertiary fees. The Zimbabwean women are marching to parliament. Angolan journalists are being detained illegally, and we discuss these things. For the first time ever, African pain has the opportunity to be witnessed by those who can empathize with it the most, other Africans. With Pan-Africanist thinking, with the internet, we now have the ability to rescue each other, and ultimately, to rescue ourselves. I'm going to tell you one more story. I have 2 minutes left. A few weeks ago, I started an Indiegogo campaign, so a crowdfunding campaign for my YouTube channel, which I'm tentatively calling Africa This Week with Sianda. It's basically me in a room with a camera talking to myself about Africa and hoping that it makes any kind of sense to anybody. So I set up the campaign and I spread the word, and in my first night, I raised $63. But those $63 moved me so deeply, and I'm overcome just remembering that first night when I sat down. And I went to the website because it has a really cool feature where you can find out where the money was coming from, right? So you click on this little icon, and then it lights up a map and says, this is where your contributions came from. When I clicked that, I got 5 countries. Nigeria, South Africa, Mozambique, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe. Yeah. And if you were to put those countries in a Google search, you're going to be told that these are the poorest countries in the world. And I don't know the people who sent me the money personally, but if I had to guess, of course, the subset of people in this world who can afford a credit card and reliable internet, they're not the most unfortunate people. But still, this support was coming from the poorest corners of the world. And I realized that even though sometimes it's very difficult to believe in Africa, Africa has no problem believing in me. Is Africa's future online? Yes. We are Africa's future, and yes, we are online. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Catenia.